Hey there. Welcome to Dark Doze. If you work nights long enough, you stop believing in quiet neighborhoods. People always say it like it's a promise. Nothing happens out here. It's safe. This town goes to bed early. That's the thing about darkness. It doesn't care about promises. It doesn't care about zip codes, school ratings, or how neatly trimmed the lawns are. I work nights. Graveyard shift. 2 years on the job. Patrolling a stretch of suburbs where the most common calls are barking dogs, noise complaints, and teenagers who think whispering makes them invisible. On nights like these, you start learning patterns. You notice which porch lights stay on until morning. You memorize which houses have doorbell cameras because you see that faint blue glow in the corner of your eye as you walk up the driveway. Most nights feel the same. Quiet roads, empty sidewalks, the low hum of the radio filling the car, so the silence doesn't get too loud, until one night breaks the pattern. That night started like any other. Cold air, clear sky, bare trees scratching at the darkness. I remember driving slow through a neighborhood where every house looked identical, thinking it was going to be one of those shifts where nothing really happened. The kind of shift you forget the moment it ends. Then dispatch came over the radio. A disturbance call. A neighbor reporting a scream. The word scream does something to you. It doesn't matter how long you've been on the job. It tightens your chest and sharpens your focus in a way no other word does. Screams mean fear, pain, panic, and they almost never mean nothing. I acknowledged the call and headed over. When I pulled up, the first thing I noticed was how dark the house was. No porch light, no interior lights, no television glow bleeding through the curtains. Just a dark shape sitting at the end of the driveway, like it didn't want to be noticed. I checked the address twice. It was right. There was a blue minivan parked in the driveway. Someone was home. I stepped out of my patrol car, and the night felt unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insects, just the sound of my boots on the pavement and the faint ticking of the engine cooling behind me. I walked up to the door and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed through the house, dull and hollow. Still nothing. As I stepped back, a man from a neighboring house walked out onto his lawn. He raised his hand slightly as he approached, like he didn't want to startle me or be mistaken for a problem. His face was pale, eyes darting between me and the dark house. He told me he was the one who called. He said the scream he heard didn't sound like an argument. It sounded like terror, like someone begging for help. He also mentioned that the woman who lived there usually lived alone, but sometimes her boyfriend stayed over. Sometimes. I tried the doorknob. Locked. I walked around the house, shining my flashlight at the windows. All of them were shut and locked. Curtains drawn tight. All except one. In the backyard, a window was slid open. Not cracked. Not partially open for air. Open wide enough for someone to climb through, without much trouble. Every other window was sealed. That window felt wrong. I called for backup and waited for confirmation. The seconds stretched. I kept my eyes on the dark opening, half expecting to see movement. When backup was confirmed, I made a decision. I climbed through the window. The air inside felt heavy and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in hours. There was a faint smell that I couldn't place right away. Not strong enough to make me gag. Just enough to register in the back of my mind. I flipped on the kitchen light. Then the living room. Contrary to what movies show, we turn lights on. Darkness hides things. Light makes them honest. I called out, identify myself, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. No response. The house looked normal. Clean. Lived in. Family photos on the wall. A pair of shoes by the couch. A coffee mug in the sink. Normal can be unsettling. I cleared the first floor quickly. No signs of forced entry. No broken furniture. No noise, which meant whatever happened, it happened upstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs longer than I should have. Training tells you to wait for backup. Experience tells you that if someone is hurt, waiting can cost a life. I unlocked the front door so backup could enter quickly when they arrived. Then I went up. Halfway up the carpeted stairs, I leaned over the railing and scanned the second floor. 4 doors. All closed. I flipped on the hallway light. The bulb flickered once, then settled. That's when I heard it. A creak. Not the sound of the house settling. Not old with complaining. A deliberate creak, like weight shifting. It came from behind one of the doors. I called out again, louder this time. Nothing. I approached the door and opened it. Bedroom. The light was off, but the hallway light spilled in enough for me to see the bed. A woman was lying under the covers, facing away from me. For a brief second, relief washed over me. She was there. She wasn't gone. Then I noticed a dark stain soaking to the blanket on the side. I couldn't see. I moved faster, heart pounding, and pulled the covers back. Blood. So much blood. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. She wasn't conscious, but she was alive. I grabbed my radio and called it in, requesting an ambulance and immediate backup. As I stepped back, my mind replayed the sound I heard earlier. The creak. It didn't fit. She didn't make that sound. Someone else did. I slowly scanned the room. My hand went to my weapon without me consciously deciding to do it. Closet. I stepped over, paused, and opened it. Empty. I turned back toward the bed. My eyes dropped to the floor, to the space underneath it. I lowered myself to my knees and lifted the bed skirt. A man was underneath, face mask covering the lower half of his face. Eyes wide, staring straight at me. Time stretched and compressed all at once. My heart slammed against my ribs. I yelled for him to show his hands. Slowly, he raised them. I ordered him to crawl out from under the bed and move to the corner of the room. I kept my distance. I wasn't about to try to handcuff someone alone when I didn't know what he might be carrying. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. When backup arrived, we took him into custody. The woman was rushed to the hospital. She survived. 6 stab wounds. The man under the bed was her boyfriend. He found out she cheated. She broke up with him. Something in him snapped. What stayed with me wasn't the motive. It was the fact that after stabbing her, he didn't run. He hid under the bed and waited. That night followed me home. I lay awake long after my shift ended, staring at my ceiling, replaying the moment I lifted the bed skirt, thinking about how close I'd been to missing him. That was the first call. The second didn't happen to me, but it was told to me by someone I trust, a night officer who'd been on the job long enough to know when something wasn't right. It started with a landlord calling police in the early hours of the morning. He was angry and panicked. One of his tenants had turned on all the water in his apartment and flooded the building. When officers arrived, tenants were standing outside in pajamas, arms crossed, watching water pour out from an upstairs unit and down the stairwell like a waterfall. They forced entry. Inside, every faucet was running. The shower blasted against the wall. The toilet overflowed. A garden hose had been pulled in from outside, spraying water everywhere. Standing in the middle of it all was a tenant. He was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. When asked what was wrong, he repeated the same sentence over and over. There are people in the walls. At first, it sounded like paranoia, a mental breakdown, until one officer checked the bedroom closet and noticed something strange. A faint outline in the wall, a rectangle, a door that didn't belong there. They pulled it open. 3 people were inside the wall, crammed into a narrow space between studs. Their faces were painted in strange symbols. Their eyes were fixed, unblinking. The tenant wasn't imagining anything. He'd turned on the water, trying to flush them out. They were later connected to a cult that targeted vulnerable people, hiding in places no one thought to look. That was the second call. The third started with a doorbell camera. A woman went house to house late at night, knocking, telling people to open the door, saying she needed blood, laughing when they threatened to call the police. She smiled into the camera like she knew someone would watch it later. Then she broke into a home. When officers found her upstairs, she was sitting on a bed, knife in hand, blood soaking the sheets. She'd cut her own wrist. Between her legs sat a child's doll covered in blood. When she lunged, an officer fired. She survived. She was later found not guilty by reason of insanity. 3 nights, 3 calls, different places, different people. Same lesson. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it waits. Part 2. That was the second call. But stories don't really end when the lights go off and the paperwork starts. Nights stretch on, and when you work them long enough, every call bleeds into the next one. After the house with the bed, after the apartment with the walls, I started noticing small changes in myself. I walked slower into dark rooms. I listened harder. Silence stopped feeling neutral. It felt loaded, like it was hiding something just out of sight. The night shift does that to you. It rewires how you think. I remember sitting in my patrol car one night, parked under a dead streetlight, engine idling, watching my breath fog the windshield. The radio crackled occasionally with routine traffic stops and welfare checks. Normal stuff. Boring stuff. That's when dispatch broke in again. Suspicious person. Door-to-door complaints. A woman knocking on houses and saying strange things. At first, it sounded like nothing. We get calls like that all the time. People struggling. People intoxicated. People who don't belong somewhere and don't know where else to go. But then the details came in. Middle-aged woman. Long, wiry hair. Holding something behind her back. Telling residents to open the door. Mumbling to herself. That changed the tone. I was one of several units sent to the area. When I arrived at the first caller's house, he met me outside, phone already in his hand, knuckles white from gripping it too hard. "You have to see this," he said, voice shaking. He pulled up the Ring doorbell footage. On the screen, the woman stepped into view. She stood too close to the camera, close enough that her face filled the frame. She didn't knock right away. She just stared, like she was studying it, like she understood exactly what it was and what it meant. Then she pressed the doorbell. The homeowner spoke through the app, asking who she was and what she wanted. She smiled. "Open the door," she said. He asked again. "I need blood." She said it calmly, casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. When he threatened to call the police, she laughed. Not nervous laughter, not embarrassed laughter, real laughter. Then she started hitting the door, slamming her hands against it, trying to rip the camera off the wall. When she finally stepped away, she backed down the porch stairs slowly, never turning her back to the camera. Still smiling, still holding something behind her back. That footage made my stomach turn. We put out a description and started canvassing the neighborhood. Multiple units driving slowly, headlights cutting through the dark, spotlights sweeping yards and alleys. Nothing. She vanished. For a moment, it felt like she'd evaporated. Then the next call came in. Breaking and entering in progress. Female suspect inside the house. Caller hiding upstairs. My adrenaline spiked as I headed that way. The address was only a few blocks from the first house. Too close. Another unit arrived almost at the same time I did. The front door was unlocked. No sign of forced entry. We drew our weapons and went in. The house was quiet. Too quiet. We announced ourselves, shouting that police were inside and ordering the intruder to come out. No response. Then we heard it. A scream from upstairs. Raw panic. Real fear. We ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, following the sound of the master bedroom. The door was locked. The husband inside unlocked it as we arrived, eyes wide, hands shaking. He and his wife had been hiding there since she came in. They said she'd been clawing at the door just minutes earlier, banging and whispering things they couldn't understand. They hadn't heard her leave. We got them out and told them to stay behind us. Then we started clearing the upstairs. Every room felt wrong. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on it. In one of the corner bedrooms, the lights were off. The door was open just a crack. As we stepped closer, we heard it, cackling, soft, controlled, almost playful. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My partner flicked the light switch. She was sitting on the bed, already looking at us. She was smiling. In her hand was a large kitchen knife. The bed sheets beneath her were soaked with blood. At first glance, it looked like someone else's. Then I noticed her wrist. She cut herself deeply. Blood was still dripping. She started repeating the same words from the doorbell footage. "I need blood," over and over. Between her legs sat a child's doll. Its fabric body was darkened with blood. Her blood. We shouted commands. Drop the knife. Hands up. Don't move. She didn't listen. She stared at me longer than anyone else. Her eyes locked onto mine like she recognized something, like she'd been waiting for me. I tried talking to her, keeping my voice calm, telling her we were there to help, telling her she didn't have to hurt anyone. She laughed again. Then she growled, and she launched herself off the bed. The next few seconds blurred together. Training took over. I fired twice, aiming for the arm holding the knife. Both shots hit. She dropped the knife and collapsed, screaming and crying, clutching her arm. We moved in fast, kicked the knife away, cuffed her, and called for an ambulance. She was losing blood fast. She survived. Later, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a psychiatric facility. That case stayed with me, not because of the violence, because of the intent. She didn't rush the doors randomly. She didn't panic when people threatened to call police. She smiled into cameras. She wanted to be seen. After that night, the calls slowed down. Weeks passed, then months. Life returned to something resembling normal. But I didn't. I found myself checking under my own bed before sleeping, checking closets twice, pausing before opening doors, listening for sounds that weren't there. I started noticing how thin the line is between ordinary and terrifying, how fast a quiet neighborhood can turn into something else entirely. And that's the thing people don't understand about nights. Danger doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't kick the door down every time. Sometimes it waits for you to assume you're safe. Sometimes it hides behind drywall. Sometimes it hides under a bed. Sometimes it smiles into a camera and asks politely to be let inside. And if you work nights long enough, you learn a truth that's hard to unlearn. The quiet isn't peaceful. It's just waiting. Part 3. The quiet didn't end after that. It never does. People think nights reset when the sun comes up, like daylight washes everything away. But when you work graveyard long enough, you realize mornings are just pauses. The darkness doesn't leave. It just steps back and waits its turn. After the woman with the knife, I took a few days off. Not officially. Just used some time I had saved. Told myself it was for rest. Truth was, I didn't want to hear the radio crackle for a while. I didn't want to respond to another call where I had to decide, in a fraction of a second, whether someone lived or died. But nights pull you back. When I returned, the routine felt familiar and foreign at the same time. Same patrol routes, same empty intersections, same houses sleeping behind closed blinds. But I was different. I noticed things I used to ignore. A curtain that moved when it shouldn't have. A light that flicked off too fast. A shadow that didn't line up with anything solid. I started trusting my instincts more than procedure. Not recklessly. Carefully. Quietly. That's when the follow-up calls started. They don't tell you this when you join the force. But the real weight of a call often comes later. In interviews. In hospital rooms. In courtrooms. In conversations you weren't prepared to have. The woman from the first house, the one who'd been stabbed, survived. Barely. I visited the hospital a few days later to give a statement. She was awake this time. Pale, wrapped in bandages. Machines humming softly around her. She thanked me. That part never gets easier. She told me she woke up briefly during the attack. Just long enough to realize what was happening. She said the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the silence after. She remembered lying there, unable to move, listening to her own breathing, and knowing he was still in the room. That detail hit harder than anything else. I didn't tell her where we found him. Some things don't help. The boyfriend never looked at me during the interrogation. He stared at the table, hands cuffed, jaw clenched. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, empty. He said he didn't mean to kill her. He said he just wanted to scare her. I've heard that line before. Fear doesn't stop at intent. It grows. It feeds on hesitation. And when it's unleashed, it doesn't listen to reason. The case wrapped up the way these cases usually do. Charges, court dates, paperwork, Another file added to a cabinet full of stories no one wants to read. The apartment with the wall people didn't get the same kind of closure. I talked to the officers involved months later. They told me the building had been partially condemned. Walls torn open, hidden spaces exposed. The idea that strangers could live inside a structure for weeks, months, without being noticed unsettled everyone involved. The tenant moved away. Last they heard, he was doing better. Therapy, medication, a fresh start somewhere quieter. Quiet, that word again. The cult members disappeared into the system. New charges, new investigations. No one ever really found out how many places they'd hidden before they were caught. That's the part that lingers. How many walls had they been inside before someone noticed? How many people heard strange noises at night and told themselves it was nothing? The third case, the woman with the doorbell camera, never fully left me either. I testified in court, watched her sit there, calm and detached, like the night never happened. When the verdict came down, not guilty by reason of insanity, the room went quiet. People don't understand what that means. It doesn't mean nothing happened. It means something happened that no one could control. She was sent to a psychiatric facility. Last I heard, she still talks about blood, still talks about voices, still smiles at cameras. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers my face. After all of that, you'd think the big calls would stop, that the universe would give you a break. It doesn't. The rest of Part 3 isn't about one specific night. It's about the accumulation, the slow realization that once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't pretend it isn't there. I responded to welfare checks where no one answered the door, and the smell told the story before we ever went inside. I responded to noise complaints that turned into domestic scenes where the silence afterward was worse than the shouting. I responded to nothing calls that turned into something because someone trusted their gut enough to dial 911. And every time I thought about those 3 nights, the bed, the wall, the doorbell, they changed how I move through the world. I don't assume locked doors mean safety anymore. I don't assume walls are solid. I don't assume a smile means harmless. When I walk into my own house at night, I turn on lights. All of them. I listen before I relax. I don't fall asleep with my back to the room. Some people would say that's paranoia. I say it's education. Because the truth is, danger doesn't usually look like danger at first. It looks like a quiet house, a dripping faucet, a woman asking politely to be let inside. And the scariest part? Most people never see it coming. They go to bed believing in quiet neighborhoods. They trust the darkness to behave. They don't realize that the night shift exists because the night doesn't sleep. And if you work nights long enough, you stop believing in safety as something permanent. You start seeing it as something temporary, borrowed, fragile, and always one bad call away from disappearing. The night shift teaches you that fear doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly, like water seeping into a wall, until one day the structure gives way. After everything that happened, I stopped counting my shifts the way I used to. I didn't measure time in days anymore. I measured it in calls, in moments where my heart rate spiked, in situations where I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that told me something wasn't right long before I could explain why. People imagine police work as constant action, sirens, chases, chaos. The truth is far worse. Most of the time, it's waiting in your car on a dark street, waiting for a door to open, waiting to hear if a sound is nothing or the start of something you won't forget. There was one night, not long after everything else, when I responded to a simple welfare check. An elderly man hadn't answered his phone in a couple of days. No history of problems. No red flags. I stood on his porch, knocking, listening to the echo of my own fist against the door. I remember noticing how quiet the neighborhood was, how peaceful it looked, how neatly trimmed the hedges were. I forced entry when no one answered. Inside, everything was still, too still. I found him in his bedroom, passed away peacefully in his sleep. No crime, no violence. But even then, standing in that quiet house, I felt uneasy, not because of what I saw, but because of what I'd learned to expect. My brain scanned corners automatically. My eyes checked under furniture without conscious thought. I hated that part of myself at first. Then I realized it was never going away. The calls kept coming. They always do. A woman who swore someone was living in her attic. Turned out to be raccoons, but the fear in her voice was real. A teenage boy hiding in his room because he heard footsteps in his hallway. Turned out to be his father coming home drunk. But for those few minutes, that kid lived in terror. A man who insisted his neighbor was watching him through the walls. Paranoia, the doctor said. But I still remember the apartment with the hidden door. Every call stacked on top of the last one. Layer after layer. I stopped laughing as easily with my coworkers. I stopped brushing things off. When someone said, "It's probably nothing," I felt a knot form in my stomach. Because sometimes it is nothing, and sometimes it's everything. One night, while parked near school after hours, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My eyes looked different. Older, more alert, like they were always scanning for movement, even when I was sitting still. That's when it hit me. I wasn't scared all the time. I was prepared all the time. There's a difference. Fear freezes you. Preparation keeps you alive. The problem is, preparation comes at a cost. You stop enjoying silence. You stop trusting calm. You stop believing that just because something hasn't happened yet, it won't. I started noticing how people talked about safety. How casually they said things like, "This never happens here," or "We don't lock our doors." I used to nod along. Now I just stay quiet. Because I've stood in too many houses where someone thought the same thing. I've seen what happens when people assume walls are solid, doors are barriers, and danger announces itself. It doesn't. It adapts. It hides where no one thinks to look. Under beds. Inside walls. Behind smiles. The night shift doesn't make you brave. It makes you honest. Honest about how thin the line is between ordinary and unbearable. Honest about how quickly a normal night can become a lifetime memory. I still work nights. I still drive those same quiet streets. I still see porch lights glowing softly, windows dark, families asleep inside thinking nothing could ever happen to them. And I hope they're right. I really do. But I also know better. Because when the radio crackles and a calm voice says there's a disturbance or a scream or something that just doesn't feel right, I don't think about how peaceful the neighborhood looks. I think about how peaceful it looked the last time. And I remind myself of the one lesson the night shift never lets you forget. The quiet isn't safety. It's opportunity. And the night is always listening.